something that serves business. It's like there's nothing works better than a constraint. And I think you learn that in the art world. It's the constraint that gives you the breakthrough. I think that's translatable to the tech world. I also strongly and firmly believe on the data side of it that you can prove that culture and creativity are good for people.
Welcome to Vita Brevis, a podcast about business, art, life, and death. I'm your host, Carlos Cardenas. Here we explore how business, creativity, and philanthropy intersect through the lives of remarkable people. I talk with entrepreneurs and community leaders who are passionate collectors and visionary patrons to discover how art shapes their work, purpose, and legacy. Because life is short, but art is forever.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Vita Brevis. I hope you all listened to the first episode with our friend Joey Hovsepian. I am here today with my friend Debbie Dupré. Debbie is the president of the board of the Austin Contemporary.
You are correct in that I am the president of the board, but the name of the institution is the Contemporary Austin.
How long have you been back here in Austin?
We moved back here about, I guess it was 15 years ago. So we have been back quite a while, back to the United States. I did go to law school here in Austin, but we were living abroad for 14 years. We went abroad for 3, and we came back 14 years later and came back to Austin.
Tell me about your sort of previous life before coming to Austin, because as I recall, you were trained as a lawyer, but you also had art galleries in various locations?
I did. So, since the beginning of my professional life, I went to law school at UT, as I had mentioned, and then went undergrad to Notre Dame. But law school at UT, then went and worked in New York at a big major law firm in New York, which is where I met my husband. Then I moved in house and I worked for a large Canadian telecommunications company as a lawyer. And eventually we had the opportunity to move abroad with my husband's job. So we started in Geneva, Switzerland, lived there. And while I was living there, I looked into practicing law. My French wasn't quite good enough to practice law in, and obviously wasn't licensed there. So I started taking art history courses because it was something that had always really interested me and didn't have much time to pursue that. And from there, we moved to London and I took some additional courses, more serious courses, where I actually got a diploma in art history and then worked at the Royal Collection and did that for a bit of time, which was an amazing institution, but realized I wanted to get a little bit more back to my commercial roots. So I opened a gallery in London, sort of when the whole YBA movement was going on in London. So a lot was happening in the contemporary art scene in London at the time, and really enjoyed that. Did that for 3 years, and just as it was really kind of getting going, we had the opportunity to move to Asia, and I wasn't sure I'd ever have that opportunity again. So moved to Singapore and thought I would open a gallery there. I actually, the last year we were in London, I went back to school, studied East Asian art, thinking I would open a gallery. But when I got to Singapore, I realized the thing I didn't have was any of the East Asian languages. And I thought it made it very difficult to get in contact with the artists that I found most interesting. So I ended up not opening a gallery there, but instead helping people learn about art. So I didn't really act as an art advisor, but I just took people on trips and introduced them to galleries and that sort of thing, which brought us back. We eventually moved to Austin. And when I got back to Austin, I'd been gone quite a while from when I went to law school here. And by then, there was quite a lot of buzz around Austin still as a cultural hub. And I arrived and thought, okay, now I'm going to open a gallery in Austin. And I was very surprised that the visual arts weren't quite living up to their impact that I thought was going to be here. So I thought, how can I change that? And I wasn't sure opening a commercial gallery was going to have much impact, and thought actually I should lean into the amazing institutions that are already in Austin and see if I could make a difference in that way. So that's what I did. I joined a couple boards, and the one that really stuck with me was the Contemporary Austin. It just was an exciting institution. It's one that has had many iterations and been around for a long period of time here in Austin. about 75 years, came out of of one tradition, merged with another organization, and now it's the Contemporary Museum of Record for Austin. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. I'm also on the board at Texas Performing Arts, which is kind of a different animal altogether, but we have quite a love for the performing arts as well. So that's something that doesn't need quite the same amount of help as the contemporary art scene, but I enjoy it very much.
Well, thank you for all your service. You're very busy.
I am busy, but it's a labor of love. I think Austin, Texas is an amazing place and they deserve amazing institutions. And if I can make just a tiny bit of difference, it's important to me.
Tell me more about your specific role at the Contemporary in terms of the responsibilities of someone in your position.
Well, the contemporary board is different to some of the other boards that I serve on in that it is a proper fiduciary board. And being the president, I first started out just being a trustee there, and then I ran the governance committee because of my legal background. I often like to ask lawyers to do that, and you're responsible sort of for board culture, making sure that you're fulfilling all the obligations under the law. But as board president, we oversee the direction of the institution. We hire one employee that is the executive director of the institution, and it's our responsibility to oversee, in our case, it's Sharon Maidenberg, so her performance. But we also have a fiduciary duty fiscally to make sure that the institution is being run prudently and sustainably and is financially sound. So the day to day is I sit on every committee on the board. I'm not an official member of all of them, but I sit in on almost everything and I run the board meetings and the executive committee, which in our situation can make decisions on behalf of the board, but rarely does. Usually the executive committee will make a recommendation on various topics to the board, and we ask the board actually to weigh in and make the decision themselves. So it's very rare that we actually use the powers granted the executive committee to make decisions.
And as far as managing the budget, is this exclusively done through fundraising and similar activities, selling tickets or attendance for exhibitions, or is there an endowment that's being managed?
There is an endowment. We have quite a healthy endowment, and luckily, the economic environment right now is very favorable. So we have it invested wisely and prudently and very safely. So we do have an endowment. We also have quite a nice mix of earned revenue. We have an art school that has been in existence for almost 60 years. So that's one avenue that not only do we support our local artists here in Austin because we hire them to conduct all the classes at the Contemporary, but we also charge for that. And it's one of the ways that we bring in people all across Austin. One of the things that art institutions, I think, generally are really working on is making sure they reach all the constituents in their city. And the art school is one way that we do that. The courses people predominantly think are for children, but they're not. They're really predominantly for adults. We do summer camps in the summer, so we also provide classes for children. But a lot of it are adults that are some practicing artists, most not. Most of them are just really interested in creativity. So that's another earned revenue. We rent our space. We have a cafe. We have a shop. So those are the general ways that we balance out philanthropy and fundraising with earned revenue.
And on that endowment, I imagine the investment vehicles are the public liquid markets?
For the most part, yep. So we have an advisor. We just actually went through an RFP process and changed advisors. I'm just, for hygiene reasons, we were pleased before, but we thought, oh, it makes some sense to look around. And so we have an advisor that sits there. There's a committee that oversees it. We require that three people on that committee sit on our board, but the rest do not. They're actually professionals in the sort of wealth management business. So they actually can give us quite good advice alongside the advisor that we actually hire to do that.
So you move between the art world, the legal world, and now nonprofit leadership. So, as far as your personal identity is concerned, what are the threads that sort of tie all of these pieces together?
I guess for me, I think part of what drove me originally to wanting to practice law is I think you're there to help people solve problems. And you do that by thinking broadly and laterally, trying to understand them, their motivation. And I think those things have kind of carried me through. I think that's what I love about the cultural space and the visual arts in particular. I think there's something about being curious and trying to understand all the context around it. You can use your eyes and visually try to understand something, but when you really dig in, you learn so much more and you see things you hadn't seen before. And part of it is just figuring out what their motivation is. And as far as leadership goes, I mean, the importance of art, I think, was part of what first spurred me to want to be involved in leadership. I think the other thing that probably taps back into my legal training that I also have a very ordered way of thinking. So that can serve in leadership. I'm probably a little bit less of a fundraiser. I'm more of a friend raiser than a fundraiser.
Yeah.
But I can be strategic. And I think that's something I really learned from the cultural space itself to be very strategic in thinking. But it does sort of that's probably the thread all the way through curiosity and strategic thinking.
Let's go back to the very beginning of working in the art space. Do you recall the first artwork experience, exhibition that really moved you and where you sort of had a light bulb moment?
I mean, when I look back even further back and thinking like, what was the first thing that I remember being, as a child? I remember going with my elementary school in Dallas, Texas, to go see the opera, and it was really outside the remit of what my experience had been within my family. It was not something that we did, and I still remember to this day some of the lines. I obviously I didn't speak Italian, but I still remember some of the lines. I remember having this really emotional connection to it, and I think from there, I've always gravitated to anything that sort of gives me that emotional connection over and over again. So there are many things. I think the next sort of big aha moment was the very first time I went to Italy, and I just being in Florence and having learned in school, and at this point, I sort of fast forward, and I'm in secondary education, and fully understanding what it meant to go from sort of the classical world and then going into the Renaissance when that's all rediscovered and trying to understand the position of the church sort of moving out of the center of the world and moving to the side as people rediscovered humanism. And it's one thing to study it in a book, it's something else to actually see it visually erupting all around you. And you can see what people are feeling and thinking. In that regard, it was a lot of it was just representational art where they were telling the story. People couldn't read at the time. And so they're telling it all in pictures. And I think that was another moment where I had a real aha, this is like the place that I want to be. It's the things that I want to think about. There's something about building your own narrative that I love, I'm not at all wed to representational art, but that was sort of one of the touch points for me. I think another one I had was, and this was not even that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, going to see The Visitor with my husband. I don't know if you've seen it. It's The Visitor by Ragnar Kutjartsson. Fabulous, fabulous work of art, and I remember him sobbing, and he loves the visual arts, not quite the way I do, and he's used to me getting teary-eyed and misty and really not being able to leave, and we were there thinking we would go there for 15 minutes. We were there like 2 hours. I could not get him out, and watching him go through the power of that, someone that I love and care about so much, and sort of finally getting to where I was also really something that I will always remember, and I'm hoping to do that for others.
Was that a film or a live performance? Because I know he does both.
A video. It's a multi-screen video. Yeah, it's beautiful. I saw it, at the Dallas Museum of Art, but it was a work that had sort of been named one of the most important of the decade, and so it was something always on my list to see, and we had an opportunity to see it. It was the very last day it was there, and, yeah, it was just watching somebody else go through that transformation is something that's really stuck with me as well.
So you've been both a dealer as well as a collector. Tell me about the different mindsets that you need to be efficient in either of those two.
I mean, I think for me, being a collector, what really matters to me is if it moves me. Does it move me? Is it something that's inviting me back again and again to look at, to think about, to talk about, um, and really to live with? I mean, not that I have everything out all the time because unfortunately it's a bit of a habit now to want to collect art. It always will weigh on me. Is it something I want to live with? Would I be happy to have it somewhere where I'm thinking about it and it's in my space? Because there's some things you might put in a place you don't go as often because it's deep and dark and love to look at it. But I think
Mm.
as a dealer, it's something totally different. I think you're looking for quality first. You're making a judgment, obviously, but you're deciding quality. You're trying to understand the moment you're in. Is this something this artist what they have to say? Is it something speaking to our time, to our moment? Um, I think it's gotta have a little bit of a universality. I think for me, when I was choosing as a dealer, I want the artist to have a point of view, and not that the work should look the same over time, but there's something that's identifiable that you look at it and you know that it's this person's hand, this person's mind that's thinking about it. And then I always liked to support artists who experiment because there's also something that they work it out and they want to keep doing the same thing. And I think that's someone who was always of less interest to me as a dealer. But you really have got to get at the end of the day, you should have a point of view as a dealer, but it's more important to understand, I think, what appeals to others. As long as you can keep up the quality and find the artists that speak to you, but also to others.
Well, there's also an economic reality when you're a dealer. You have payroll, you have storage costs, exhibition costs, et cetera. It's a functioning business, where, functioning from an institutional role, a nonprofit is very, very different.
Completely. Completely, and that's why it's not, as a dealer, certainly not as you're choosing artists and who to work with. There's all sorts of things you gotta think about. I mean, I loved working with artists, but
Mm,
as a dealer, sometimes it could be frustrating because you do have to make payroll. You do have to do all of those things, and you could have somebody who's fabulous, but if they are not performing at a professional level, it can make some of your decisions quite difficult, to get exhibitions open on time, closed on time, get work in place, et
yeah.
cetera. So, yeah, I think the pressures are quite different. I mean, obviously, as a collector, there's really it's a labor of love versus an ongoing business where people depend on you.
Well, galleries have this, very strategic programming where they have to mix commercial exhibitions
Mhm.
where they can pay for the exhibitions that might be more challenging, much less commercial. So I know that's a really, really hard equilibrium to balance.
It's a very hard I also feel like, having exhibitions group versus solo, that's another one that if you're taking a gamble on somebody, while artists always would prefer to have something where their works solo or maybe with one other person. Oftentimes, I found that the way I would balance it out is to have some one or two group shows that you could bring in and make sure that you're reaching out to lots of people and you could hit that commercial mark a little bit easier sometimes by doing that and trying to convince artists that that really was going to serve them. It gets their work out and that someone might come in to see one person, but then they will recognize and appreciate their work. So I think that was another way to try to balance that commercial versus challenge and risk taking. But I think if you only go commercial, I mean, we've all seen it where there are many galleries that are so not interesting, and you wonder how they survive because they're not actually serving anyone by being purely a commercial enterprise and not thinking about taking a little bit of risk.
Were you ever involved in the secondary market by any chance?
I was not. I was not.
The economic circumstances are, a little bit different. In Europe, we talk about the difference between a gallerist and a dealer. And the way I like to think of it is a dealer is somebody that's basically owns inventory. So they're not in a consignment relationship with the artist anymore. And that's more of a gallerist position where it's almost like they're an agent, almost like a talent agent, so to speak.
Yes, correct, and I feel like that holds true here, though there are some, the larger galleries here, gallery owners, often will own some of the inventory if they really believe in the artist. But yes, I think that's a really good distinction for people to understand that the typical gallerist is working on consignment and is really promoting the artist. And they sometimes need to be reminded of that, that is ultimately they are working as an agent and they should be always promoting.
At the end of the day, I think what shifts is the sort of fiduciary responsibility. Is it to the artist when you have an agency
Mhm.
kind of relationship? But when you are dealer and doing secondary market, your fiduciary duty is to the owner of that painting. So the sort of responsibilities shift quite a bit.
It does. It's quite interesting, and I think it makes both of them. There's a lot of cautionary tales around either or both.
What role do you see the city of Austin playing in this sort of ecosystem? We have a few commercial galleries in town. A couple of them are really, really great, of course.
It's in a good space right now. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. We sort of have one blue chip gallery that's actually about to close. And then we have some really good emerging galleries. There are also some steady players that I would argue are a little more commercial, but I think our emerging galleries right now are doing some interesting things. We've got, I would say there's at least four of them. They have very different perspectives, they bring different things to the market, and I'm finding that really energizing. I would like to see us have 1 or 2 blue chip, and then I think the mid-market is really where there's almost nothing there, and so I certainly would like to see something happen. There's always been talk about, one of the coastal big boy galleries coming in and having a satellite here. And I know that's being talked about again with our blue chip gallery closing. And I don't know if that's the right move. It's been very interesting trying to think through how Texas kind of fits in the greater world. It's such a powerhouse collecting state. It's an economic engine, but there's still something about building the homegrown confidence to buy within the state. I think that people almost need that vetting from the coasts or the bigger markets or the bigger galleries that gives them license to spend money and collect. So I think it puts a lot of pressure on our galleries here in Austin. So I'd love to see more, but I do think the emerging are doing some exciting things right now, and that's exciting to me.
Something that I think is interesting, and you hear a lot of kvetching about it, the sort of commercial gallery scene in Texas not at all being what it is in the coast. But the truth is, if you look at the institutions and the quality of the institutions in Texas, and I'm talking about everything we have out in Marfa, all the wonderful institutions we have in Houston, the Dominial, the Rothko Chapel, et cetera. The Twombly Room is just breathtaking. Here in Austin recently, Ellsworth Kelly did the Austin Chapel, yes.
Uh-huh.
And, up in Dallas and in Fort Worth. When you look at it from an institutional point of view, I think it's like as high quality as, something you'll find in, Belgium or Switzerland or something like this. So I don't think we necessarily need to sort of have a robust commercial gallery system to still have a very, very relevant institutional system. We have world-class programs in Texas. I mean, look at Ballroom Marfa and, the DMA up in Dallas. I'm not going to list off everything, but I kind of have this thesis that we don't necessarily have to have a strong commercial scene because the institutional scene is so, so solid.
I mean, I guess I agree with the premise that the institutional system is very strong. I do worry that without a stronger commercial scene, that it's hard to build institutions. So we've got many institutions. Some of them are supported, started by a very small group of collectors, and as you are trying to build a base of support, I think that can be troublesome if you're not continually bringing along new collectors and if they're not well served by their home market. I do worry that it's harder and harder to build more people into the fold of philanthropy and to continue to support those institutions because I would argue that many, if not most of them, were started by just a few important families, collectors, and they could do it on their own. But in order to keep it going and steward those institutions into the future, we've got to continually build that philanthropic base. Something that Austin particularly suffers from. I think there's more of a tradition now in Houston. It's been a couple generations. Dallas, it's going into its second generation. Actually, the bigger scene in the north used to be Fort Worth, which is still going strong, but that used to be stronger than Dallas before. That sort of group of collectors, I guess, what is 70s, 80s, really got going up in Dallas and sat behind the DMA and brought it along. I would argue, Barbara Marfa, the same thing, where it's two people who have a vision, a very strong vision, and they need to build that group of collectors to steward it into the future. So, I do worry if you don't have all of the whole ecosystem that you could suffer in the stewardship going forward.
Well, I think local artists are also obviously a key component of the ecosystem, and they need to exhibit locally. So there has to be a sort of a fabric or a venue for local artists to exhibit. And very often, of course, there are nonprofits, smaller nonprofits. They also have, bills to pay and would probably like to sell artwork as well and develop a collector base. So they also need strong regional galleries to help prop up that part of the ecosystem.
I completely agree. And I would argue that regionality right now I see as a strength. I feel like being a regional gallery, a regional institution, you can take more risk. I mean, one of the things that I would say is we are in a political moment, a bit of a chaotic moment where things are realigning, government funding is going away. And we can take more risks because we're a little bit under the radar. People aren't
Mhm.
looking at what we're doing. I mean, it's when you see, with the National Gallery and the Smithsonian, there are real pressures on which artists will show and the people trying to weigh in, from all different sides of the political spectrum. But I feel like there is something about regionality that allows you to take those risks because you're just a little less visible. I know that the contemporaries felt that way, that we have shown some things that we worried about it, and it's not ever really been an issue, knock on wood, because we're just that little bit under the radar. So I would argue there's something really amazing right now about regionality that I think is really important for the entire ecosystem, nationally.
How do you see the role of Austin in particular, maybe even thinking a little bit more broadly of Texas? We're obviously playing second fiddle, if not third fiddle, to the coast, of course. But, we've been sort of expecting things from the tech community that would sort of bring a big sort of patronage piece here. And I think in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, people were expecting this for a long time. And it has, come to fruition in a very modest way in Northern California. And, there's hopes for Austin being such a sort of tech and entrepreneurial hub that would help to sort of develop the cultural fabric of the city.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that particular thing. I think that the money has come before and culture has not followed, but I do think the original attraction to Austin was creativity, keep Austin weird, innovation. So I think people come here with that in mind. And I would argue that we maybe haven't really figured out the invitation. And maybe that's what happened in San Francisco. I think that institutions felt they needed to be really buttoned up. And that was the way. And they would show all this data and that they would somehow compel people to become interested. And I'm just wondering if the invitation needs to be something different, where it's be curious, have a conversation, come check it out, see what it's about, and do it in a way that taps into what's important. I feel like in the 21st century, and part of what the tech revolution has done, it has democratized arts and culture. It makes it readily available to people. The image is everywhere. You can access it on your phone, at home on your computer. You don't even have to see it live, though I would always argue go see it in person. But there's something about that of reaching to everybody that I think you've got to make the invitation first to to people to come see, and then ultimately then you turn that into a supporter. But I think people are looking for something different. They're not necessarily, I think before collectors institutions sort of were slightly different, where they were more arbiters of taste, temples of culture. And so collectors would come in, they would put pressure on, they were interested in something, would put pressure on the institutions. We will decide what's good. And it was a different model. And I think right now, institutions are moving away from collecting. They're moving to more public space, more public engagement, inviting people in with through their education and through their programming. So I think we need to continually refine and listen to what would get somebody to come for the very first time. And if I think it's curiosity. I do. I feel like it's the problem solving. And something that serves business, it's like there's nothing works better than a constraint. And I think you learn that in the art world, that you're trying to figure something out as an artist. And it's the constraint that gives you the breakthrough. I think that's translatable to the tech world. I also strongly and firmly believe on the data side of it that you can prove that culture and creativity are good for people. Doctors prescribe it in other sort of a bit more forward thinking states. You can you can lower the cost of health insurance. You attract talent. There's so many economic reasons you can also make around that. So maybe that's part of the invitation to come in and check it all out.
How do you think being involved in the arts can make somebody a better business person?
I do honestly think it's lateral thinking, which I think business people have, but you grasp whatever lesson you can learn around you. I think understanding context and motivation, I think that's something that you learn over and over again while you're looking at art. Trying to think around why it looks the way it does. What are they saying? What does it mean to me? Why am I reacting to it? I think that thread also, that as a business person, your decision is only as good as you understanding what that person is motivated by, that's sitting opposite you or you're selling to. I think that's another real through line. And again, I think it's curiosity. Business will become stagnant. You will never progress, or you may have a flash in the pan, but the way to continue going is to always be changing. Even when you're cannibalizing your own business, you've got to always be curious to what's next, what's next, what's next. How do I better serve? Do I become more efficient? I think there's quite a lot to learn from the art world, but to me, it's sort of curiosity, lateral thinking, understanding motivation and constraint.
If we were to look at the philanthropic piece and
Mhm.
people that come into the fold, what is the sort of social role?
I think the thinking is that there are, I mean, at least I know at the contemporary, because we've just done, I guess it was about 4 or 5 years ago, we did a complete rehaul on our mission, vision, values, from being to serving our collector base and being inward looking to looking outward and looking at the audience and artists. Those were the two. That was the sort of sea change for us. And I'm looking at it um, that way. And I think part of the philanthropic way of experience is that we sort of divided up serving our audience. Who is our audience? So we did a bunch of research and we sort of put it in like 5 or 6 buckets. There are like lifelong learners, there are people who just want to be art adjacent. And as you think about each one of those categories, you realize that you need to develop events around those. I mean, part of what is beautiful about an art institution is all you do is put things on to invite people in for. But we really think about having a potpourri, a real mixture, but there's real thought and time going into the mixture, not only in our exhibitions, thinking about, okay, as you mentioned before, I'm in the gallery space, something that's easier to digest will be part of our season, and then there'll be something that's a little bit more difficult and a little bit riskier and more challenging. And so we even on our exhibitions, but our programming for sure, some of it is just come and have fun. We have rooftop sessions once a month where we literally bring in music. There'll be some kind of theme. We'll always have a different a mixologist there, and we just invite people to come up and have a good time. And but they have to we do all of this on the rooftop of our downtown location. They have to come up through the museum, through the galleries. And part of it's that because we also learned that on people's life journey, you have all different spots on where you are in your life and what kind of time you have and interest level. I mean, if you've just had a newborn baby, you probably are thinking where I can go in a stroller, which might be and outside might be slightly different than what you're thinking about just graduating college and starting your professional life. So I think there's real thought in the philanthropy piece of how do you get people from first attending, then becoming a member, then feeling at home, eventually a supporter, and then hopefully you bring them fully in the fold and maybe they come and they serve as a trustee and then they're an ambassador for the institution itself and going out into the world and inviting other people in, and it should build that way. But I think you have to always put a lot of thought in the mix of what you're offering. And it doesn't all have to be the most challenging art, though an institution should offer that, but it needs to offer more. I also feel like in times like these, it reminds you of inviting everybody in. There's all sorts of people who self select out. They think, oh, I've never done that before. My family's not interested. Art isn't for me. There are people who are from groups that haven't been served well, but there are also people who believe that contemporary art might not be for them because of their political affiliation, which is crazy because what contemporary art does is reflect our time and give us a way to talk about the most challenging issues. So again, I go back to that idea of invitation, which I think extends into the philanthropy answer is you should invite everybody, come. It should be a public square. That's what institutions can do right now. I mean, even architecture right now, if you look at institutions, are serving, they're changing the way they look. They're having less white box galleries and more public space so they can serve as the town square. And I think that may be of interest to people as they're thinking about, do I want to lean in, actually support an organization? Is if you can invite lots of people in and promote conversation, to me, that's a sexy proposition.
How can businesses be more involved? I imagine there's sponsorship opportunities, but also private events, for example.
Both. It's interesting in Austin. It is not in the ethos here in Austin that corporations do a lot of leaning in of our institutions. If you look and you'll look at exhibitions, it's very common if you were to go to a MoMA, a LACMA, you would see a big list of heavy hitters that support various initiatives or exhibitions. And in Austin, it's not the tradition here. But you're right. You can certainly sponsor an exhibition. You can sponsor a program. Oftentimes, it's inviting them to events. So we have a big gala. It could be, sponsoring a table and inviting people from either important clients or from your C-suite. But also, there are things that are more kid friendly, where they would buy 50 tickets and invite some employees or clients to come. Certainly private events where we do quite a lot of that, where they want to rent the space and there is a little frisson to be art adjacent. And so oftentimes that's the way that we get corporations interested in what we're doing is by having corporate events and either on the rooftop or at Laguna Gloria. We also have a sculpture park. For those of you who don't know the institution, there's also a 14-acre sculpture park that people have institutions, organizations have come in and either rent a part of it or all of it or the villa. I mean, there's different parks that you can lean into and have events.
Austin is a big city for events. So we have the Circuit of the Americas. South by Southwest is huge. ACL. There's various, tech startup weeks at least twice a year. It seems like there's always something on the calendar. I imagine that this is a big part of your strategy in communicating the institution. Tell us a little bit more about how the Contemporary is involved in these broader events.
We do a number of things. They're all slightly different. I mean, part of it is it just affects calendar planning, good and bad. You have visitors and you also have people leave. I would also argue that University of Texas football also impacts our calendar in a very real way. But we do try to participate in the events. So something like South by, we'll have people from the organization sit on panels. Same with the Texas Book Festival. We obviously we will host events both for the people who are putting on the event, but also for corporate sponsors who come in and think, oh, I'm going to bring people in. I want to be present at South by during the tech part of it, and I need a place to have an event to function. And so we also lean in that way, offering rental space. So there's a whole list of ideas. We try to also coordinate programming around it. Our exhibitions generally are not necessarily programmed around that, but the programming around it is. So if there's something that we think is of interest to a particular community that's here in Austin, we will splash it in a big way programmatically. Um, so like during the Austin Film Festival, there are things where either we're artist adjacent or thematically it's adjacent to a film that's being shown to our exhibition, things like that, where we can lean in programmatically and support either support what's on offer in that activity or try to attract new audience. But it's certainly a way for us to reach out past our Austin community during those influx of visitors for these various events.
Considering that art lives us all, what does meaningful cultural impact look like for you, both for the city of Austin and for your own legacy?
Ooh, that's a big one. For the city, I think that if Austin wants to remain a cultural capital, it's going to have institutions that help live up to that. I mean, I think the institutions, again, I mean, sort of just to hone in on some of what we've talked about already, I think it can be a civic forum for people. I think institutions also serve as a public memory. There are things when people think about I'm an Austinite, what does that mean to be an Austinite? Both historically, over time, what does it mean to be an Austinite? But what does it mean going into the future? I think it institutionalizes the power of creativity. Um, so I feel like that's a way. I think the ambition of the city. I think that the institutions leaning into your cultural capital and showing that you're a place for creativity and innovation helps show the ambition of the city. I do worry that we're at an inflection point right now in Austin where people have come in for all sorts of reasons thinking that Austin is a place where great things can happen. And if we don't bring along the culture, not just in the visual art space, but culture writ large, if we cannot bring that along, we could end up being just another large, boring city. And that would be such a shame to the spirit of Austin, I think. And personally, I feel like I would like to have an impact in giving Austin what it deserves. It deserves an institution that really serves contemporary art. And I don't think it needs to look a certain way. The institution has great ambitions of what what the spaces could look like. Right now, we have two very disparate facilities. We've got a white box gallery space downtown, and then we've got this sculpture garden. So you can look almost any way, but what I would hope to leave is an institution that's sustainable, strong, forward looking, and is actually serving all the people in Austin, not just a small collector group. And I hope they come and are very interested, but all the people of Austin to let them know that art, creativity, innovation, especially in a city like Austin, is for them.
That is a wonderful, wonderful way to close this out. Thank you so much, Debbie.